Okay, so what happens when a ruler decides to just delete their country's entire religion? I mean, overnight. We're going to dive into the story of this one pharaoh who tried one of the most radical experiments in all of history. He basically tried to cancel a whole pantheon of gods for just one, the sun. It's an incredible story of vision, of power, and what happens when those big ideas slam right into reality. It shook ancient Egypt to its very foundations.
Imagine hearing this. One day, your king just stands up and says it. With those words, a young pharaoh just shattered thousands of years of tradition. This wasn't some minor new rule. This was a full-on declaration of war against his own culture. It put Egypt on a collision course with its own identity. So let's get into how this whole thing even started.
All right, let's set the scene. It's 1353 BCE. A new pharaoh takes the throne, a young guy named Amenhotep IV. But right away, it's clear he's not going to play by the rules. Instead of just ruling, he starts a rebellion. He throws away his own name, a name that honored the old gods, and calls himself Akhenaten, which means something like he who is beneficial to the Aten. I mean, can you imagine? Just by doing that, he kicks off this massive crisis of faith and power.
So you gotta understand the political game that Akhenaten walked into. It's like a chessboard with two huge players. In one corner, you've got his mom, Queen T. She's this absolute diplomatic powerhouse, the one keeping the kingdom's foreign policy steady. But in the other corner, you've got the priesthood of the god Amun. And these guys were incredibly powerful. They controlled more land, more wealth than even the royal family. They were basically a shadow government. And they'd whisper things like, a king's name fades, but Amun is forever. That's not just talk. That's a direct threat to the pharaoh's power. So what does Akhenaten do? He makes his move, and it is absolutely brutal. His first big action as king wasn't about building something new. It was about destroying something old. He literally sent out teams of workers with chisels all across Egypt with one job: find the name of the god Amun and carve it off of every single temple wall, every monument. This wasn't just some policy change. This was a physical attack on the priesthood's source of power. He was trying to erase their god and their influence from existence. Okay, so if you're gonna get rid of hundreds of gods, you need something to replace them with, right? Well, Akhenaten introduces something completely new, a single god called the Aten. And this wasn't just another god to add to the lineup. No, this was a concept that was so abstract, so different, that it meant they had to rewrite the entire rulebook for how you even practice religion. So get this, the Aten had no statue, no idol. You couldn't depict it as a person or an animal, which was how all the other gods were shown. Its only form was the actual physical sun in the sky. In art, you'd see the sun disk with these rays coming down, and at the end of each ray was a little hand holding the Ankh, the symbol of life, and offering it to the royal family. And here's the key. This was a god made of pure light, not carved from stone. It was a universal force available to everyone, not some secret deity hidden away for a few priests. And a new god like this, it demands a totally new way to worship. I mean, just think about the difference. The old gods, they were worshipped in these dark, hidden temple chambers. Their power was kept secret, controlled by a handful of priests. But Akhenaten basically said, if you put a roof over it, you're hiding the god. So his new temples, they were built with no roofs at all. They were completely open to the sky, so everybody could worship right there in the direct sunlight. And with that one move, he makes religion public and transparent. He rips the power away from the priests and puts it all in his own hands, because now he's the only connection to the sun.
But Akhenaten didn't stop at just changing the religion. Nope. He decided he needed to build an entirely new world for it. So he abandons the old capital, Thebes, which, by the way, was the center of power for the Amun priesthood he hated, and he goes out into the middle of the desert to build a brand new city from the ground up. He called it Akhetaten. It was a capital city designed for one thing and one thing only: to worship the sun. And the architectural rule for this entire massive city was based on one simple but totally radical idea. Just imagine this: a city where every single building, every street, is designed so that nothing blocks the sun's path. This wasn't just about making things look nice. This was his religion turned into bricks and mortar. The whole city was basically engineered to be one giant open-air temple, always soaked in sunlight. Now, to pull this off, Akhenaten had to build fast. And that meant he had to ditch the way Egyptians had always built things, with those massive stone blocks meant to last forever. Instead, he came up with these smaller, standardized blocks called talatat. One person could carry one. It was basically like an ancient Egyptian assembly line.
Using those and a ton of mud bricks, the city just shot up out of the desert in only a few years. And yeah, the temples had no roofs, and the streets were all aligned perfectly with the sun's path, creating this cool effect they called moving shade. But this whole build it fast thing, it was deeply, deeply unsettling to the old guard. See, a pharaoh's job was to build for eternity, to carve his legacy into stone that would last for thousands of years. By choosing speed over permanence, Akhenaten was basically saying his ideology was more important than his legacy. The priests, they were horrified. They saw this city of mud and thought, this is a sign. His entire reign is going to be just as temporary as these walls. So while Akhenaten is completely wrapped up in this huge spiritual project, building his sun city, writing poems to the Aten, the actual practical business of running an empire started to fall apart. And yeah, his obsession had some very, very real consequences. And this quote from a scribe's diary at the time just nails the problem. While the king was looking at the sun, things on the ground were getting bad. Alliances with other kingdoms started to crumble, little rebellions started popping up along the borders, and back home, the economy, which for centuries had been tied to the very temples he was shutting down, it was in trouble. The people didn't need a philosopher king. They needed a leader who was paying attention to reality, not just the sky. And then it all just shatters. The whole experiment collapses, and it happens incredibly fast. We're talking less than a decade. Akhenaten himself dies suddenly, mysteriously, around 1336 BCE. They never even found his body. There's this brief, chaotic power vacuum, and then the throne goes to his 9-year-old son. Yep, the kid we all know today as King Tut. And with a child on the throne, the old guard, the priests, the generals, they saw their opening, and the mission to undo everything he had ever done started almost overnight. In the end, tradition won. The old priesthood, the military leaders, the nobles, all the people who had been quietly waiting on the sidelines, they took back control. The dream of a city of pure light was officially over. The old order came back with a vengeance, and they started the long, systematic process of burying this heresy, burying Akhenaten, in sand and silence. Now, obviously, a 9-year-old isn't calling the shots. Guided by his powerful advisors, young King Tut basically goes down a checklist to reverse everything his dad did. This wasn't chaos. It was a methodical demolition job. Step 1, reopen all the old temples. Step 2, give the priests back all their money and power. Step 3, move the capital back to Thebes. And the final brutal step, send work crews to literally take Akhenaten's sun city apart, brick by brick, and then, get this, use those same bricks to build new monuments to the very gods he tried to erase. And just to make sure everyone got the memo, they put up a big public monument called the Restoration Stele. This thing was pure propaganda. It basically said, hey everyone, the reason things have been so bad is because the gods left us during that whole sun thing. But don't worry, the new king is here to fix it. And the key message was right there at the end. He was carving the gods' images from stone. The message was loud and clear. That brief, weird age of light was over. The eternal, reliable order of stone was back for good. But here's the final, perfect irony. Even as they were literally chiseling Akhenaten's name out of history, they couldn't scrub away everything he did. The unique art style from his time, the Amarna style, you've probably seen it, where people look way more natural and human, that style actually stuck around in Egyptian art for a while. And some of his boring but practical reforms, like better calendars, they kept those too. So yeah, the revolution was dead, but its ghost kind of lingered. When you boil it all down, Akhenaten's story leaves us with this big, timeless question. He was reaching for this pure, perfect ideal, right? A world bathed in the absolute truth of the sun. But while he was staring up at the heavens, he completely lost track of the messy, complicated, real-world needs of his people on the ground. It really makes you wonder, how do you balance those huge visionary ideas with just reality? Where's that line where the sun and humanity can actually stand side by side?